The silence was the first thing she noticed. It was a specific kind of silence, heavy and monetized. The kind that only exists in spaces where the collective net worth could settle the debt of a small nation. Here, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual Constellation Gala, silence was a currency of power. It filled the spaces between the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of conversations about acquisitions, both corporate and cultural. The air, thick with the scent of tuberose and ambition, felt suffocating. Zara Williams moved through that silence like a ghost, her black uniform a void against the glittering backdrop of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. She was temporary staff, a rented pair of hands, invisible by design. Her job was to keep the crystal flutes filled with vintage Dom Pérignon, to materialize with a silver tray of canapés before a guest even registered hunger, and to melt back into the shadows. She was good at it. Invisibility had been her primary survival skill for 28 years. She was refilling a water glass at a table occupied by a hedge fund titan and a junior senator when a minor disturbance rippled through the room's placid surface. A server, a young man no older than 20, had stumbled, sending a single, ruby-red drop of Bordeaux onto the white marble floor near the main dais. It was a mistake anyone could have made, but in this temple of perfection, it was a desecration. Richard Blackwood, the events director, materialized from the wings of the stage. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his tuxedo tailored to within an inch of its life. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a hand on the young server's shoulder, a gesture that looked paternal from a distance, but was rigid with menace up close. His words, a low hiss, were meant only for the boy, but in the amplified quiet, they carried. "You are a stain on a masterpiece," Blackwood whispered, his voice a silken threat. "Get out. Now." The boy fled, his face a mask of crimson shame. Zara felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had seen men like Blackwood her whole life, men who used precision and polish as weapons, who believed their station granted them the right to treat others as disposable scenery. She continued her circuit, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. Her final stop was the VIP table, where the night's keynote speaker, a philanthropic billionaire, held court. As she leaned in to pour water, her elbow brushed a small, decorative place card, nudging it an inch out of alignment. It was nothing, a millimeter of imperfection in a universe of casual flaws. But Blackwood saw it. His presence was a sudden drop in temperature behind her. "Stop," he said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the ambient chatter like a shard of glass. Every head at the table, a constellation of New York's most powerful, turned. The senator, the titan, the billionaire, all of them, now watching. Blackwood circled the table until he stood before her. He didn't look at her. Not at first. He looked at the offending place card. His lip curled in a faint, theatrical sneer. He adjusted it with 2 fingers, a surgeon correcting an amateur's clumsy stitch. Then, his eyes, the color of chips of ice, finally lifted to meet hers. "We have a certain caliber of guest tonight," he said, his voice soft, yet carrying the distinct sonic weight of public condemnation. He smiled, a thin, bloodless slash in his handsome face. "Let's ensure the service reflects that. Shall we?" It was a masterclass in humiliation, publicly deniable, privately devastating. He hadn't called her incompetent. He hadn't used a slur. He had simply, with a few carefully chosen words, declared her substandard, a flaw in his perfect evening, in front of the very people whose approval defines success in this city. The guests looked away, a collective polite dismissal. She was no longer a person. She was a momentary awkwardness to be ignored. But as Blackwood held her gaze a second too long, something flickered in his eyes. A flash of recognition. No, something colder. Something personal. And in that moment, as his face came into sharp focus, the precise cut of his jaw, the slight scar above his left eyebrow, it happened. A memory, sharp and jagged, pierced the veil of her consciousness. Not a full memory, but a fragment, searing and painful. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, the sound of a woman's muffled sobs through a thin wall, a man's voice, thick with despair, saying the name Blackwood. The gala, the guests, the suffocating opulence, it all dissolved into a low hum. The knot in her stomach didn't loosen with fear or shame. It hardened. It solidified into something cold, dense, and unnervingly calm. Her breath didn't catch. Her hands, holding the heavy crystal pitcher, were perfectly steady. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the ballroom's chandeliers, giving away nothing. This preternatural stillness was not submission. It was the moment a decision is forged in the crucible of absolute clarity. It was the silent, internal click of a switch being thrown. Tears would have been a release. Anger would have been a spectacle. But this cold, unnerving composure, this was a declaration. In her silence, witnessed by the city's elite, Zara Williams was not breaking. She was focusing. And Richard Blackwood, though he couldn't possibly understand why, felt a faint, involuntary shiver of unease. He had intended to erase her, but instead, he had made himself a target. Zara's world was a universe away from the gilded cage of the Met. It was a third-floor walk-up in Queens, where the air smelled of her neighbor's curry and the distant rumble of the 7 train was a constant, comforting heartbeat. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress, built around one person, her younger brother, Marcus. Marcus was born profoundly deaf, a fact that had shaped Zara's existence more than any other. While other 8-year-olds were learning multiplication tables, Zara was learning American Sign Language, her small hands struggling to form the complex shapes that would become her brother's bridge to the world. She became his interpreter, his advocate, his shadow. Their father, a brilliant but troubled linguist, had taught her the fundamentals, emphasizing that language was more than words. It was culture, context, and power. He spoke of syntax and semantics with a passion that bordered on obsession. Then, when Zara was 12, he was gone. The official story was a heart attack. But the whispers that followed of failure, of disgrace, of a broken man clung to their family like a shroud. Her mother never spoke of it. Her grief, a locked room Zara was forbidden to enter. All that remained of him was his obsessive focus on the nuances of communication, a legacy Zara had inherited. Marcus was now 26. With a mind that moved at the speed of light, he'd graduated top of his class from Cooper Union with a degree in software engineering. His senior project, an intuitive haptic feedback system for visually impaired users, winning awards. Yet, he worked 40 hours a week at a commercial print shop, calibrating industrial printers for minimum wage. The rejections were always the same, couched in polite corporate speak, not the right cultural fit, concerns about team synergy, communication challenges. It was a gentle way of saying his deafness was a liability they wouldn't risk. Each rejection felt like a personal failure to Zara. He's brilliant. She'd signed to Marcus after another demoralizing interview. They just can't see it. It's okay. Z. He'd sign back, his movements fluid and resigned. You can't make the hearing world hear. Her defense against that world was a simple, spiral-bound notebook she carried everywhere. It was her external hard drive, an extension of her mind. For over a decade, she had filled its pages with observations. It began as a way to help Marcus, documenting the micro-expressions, gestures, and vocal tones of hearing people so she could provide him with a richer, more contextual interpretation. But it had evolved, working service jobs in the city's most exclusive hotels and venues. She became a silent anthropologist of the powerful. She documented how CEOs used feigned ignorance as a negotiation tactic, how politicians used specific hand gestures to signal confidence, how a change in vocal pitch could betray a lie in a multi-million-dollar deal. She diagrammed the seating arrangements in boardrooms, noting how power flowed and pooled. She analyzed the user-unfriendly design of the technology the elite used, from glitchy conference call systems to inaccessible event registration apps, noting every flaw, every point of friction, and sketching out elegant, intuitive solutions in the margins. The notebook was a secret history of unseen problems and overlooked solutions, a testament to the fact that expertise is often invisible in the wrong uniform. The night of the gala, she returned home long after Marcus was asleep. The memory fragment triggered by Blackwood still lingered, sharp and unsettling. Blackwood. Why did that name echo with such sorrow? She pushed it aside, her focus shifting to the immediate. The humiliation had not faded. It had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. She opened her notebook, under the heading Met Gala. She didn't write about the sting of Blackwood's words. Instead, she wrote power dynamic analysis public shaming as a tool for reinforcing social hierarchy. Subject RB uses veiled language to assert dominance without violating overt social norms. Effective, but creates potential for backlash from a target with nothing to lose. It was a cold, clinical analysis, a way of transforming a personal wound into a data point. It was how she coped. It was how she planned. Before Blackwood's calculated cruelty had poisoned the evening, there had been a different, quieter moment. A moment of connection that had planted a seed. David Brooks, the reclusive tech billionaire behind the revolutionary audio-to-haptic translation company, Sonus, sat alone on a velvet banquette. Brooks, who was deaf, was the guest of honor. Yet, he was an island in a sea of networking, isolated by the very communication barriers his technology aimed to solve. Executives would approach him, speak too loudly, as if raising their volume could bridge the chasm, and retreat in awkward defeat. Zara had observed this from across the room. She saw the subtle sag of his shoulders, the polite but vacant smile, the mask of isolation she had seen on her brother's face 1,000 times. Breaking protocol. She had approached him. Her hands moved in the clean, precise ASL her father had insisted upon. Mr. Brooks, your work on haptic linguistics is groundbreaking. Are you enjoying the evening? Brooks's entire demeanor shifted. Surprise, then relief, washed over his features. His hands flew, sharp and excited. You sign fluently. How do you know my work? Their conversation drew a small, curious audience. Zara spoke of his technology not as a consumer, but as an expert. The latency in the beta version of your live transcription glasses creates a cognitive dissonance for native signers. She signed. The brain processes the visual of the sign before the haptic feedback, causing a split second of confusion. Brooks was stunned. He had been trying to articulate that exact issue to his own engineering team for months. How do you know that? My brother is an engineer. He's deaf. She signed. We talk about user experience friction all the time. He says designers often solve for the disability, not for the person. Among the onlookers was Victoria Sterling, the impeccably dressed and perpetually stressed CEO of Sterling Technologies. Her company was on the verge of launching a new lifestyle app, and the pressure from her board was immense. She watched the exchange not with mere curiosity, but with the sharp, calculating eye of someone who recognized a rare resource. She saw a problem: a billionaire guest being isolated, and an elegant, unexpected solution in the form of a server. She didn't understand what they were signing, but she understood the language of expertise. When the conversation ended, and Brooks was enthusiastically tapping his number into Zara's cheap phone, Victoria made a mental note. This woman, whoever she was more than she appeared. That small act of recognition was a flicker of light in the darkness, a taste of being seen that was about to become a lifeline. 2 weeks later, the lifeline appeared in the form of a frantic, early morning phone call. Victoria Sterling's voice was stripped of its usual corporate polish, frayed with panic. "Our new app, Connect, is a disaster," she said, dispensing with pleasantries. "It launches in 3 days. We have a press event with the mayor. Beta testers from the deaf community are calling it insulting and unusable. My entire senior team is stumped. David Brooks gave me your number. He said you understand things." Hours later, Zara stood in a glass-walled conference room at Sterling Technologies, a stark contrast to her usual world of service corridors and linen closets. She still wore her dark blue server uniform from another catering job she'd just finished. Across a sterile white table, Victoria Sterling and her team of six-figure engineers looked on with a mixture of desperation and skepticism. "Show me," Zara said simply. Victoria slid a tablet across the table. Zara's fingers moved over the screen with practiced efficiency. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft tap of her finger on the glass. The silence grew tense. Finally, she looked up, her expression calm and analytical. "This app was designed by hearing people who read a book about deaf culture," she stated. "Not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. It's filled with assumptions that are fundamentally wrong." A young engineer bristled. "We ran it by 3 accessibility consultants. Consultants who get paid to check boxes for legal compliance." Zara cut him off gently. "Not to create a product people will love. Your sign-to-text recognition algorithm is based on textbook ASL. It doesn't account for regional dialects, slang, or the grammatical speed of natural conversation. Using it feels like being forced to speak a version of English from the 1800s. It's clunky and dehumanizing." She swiped to another screen, and this feature, the deaf mode, that makes all the text larger and the colors brighter. It's patronizing. Deafness isn't a visual impairment. You're solving a problem that doesn't exist, which tells the user you don't understand them at all. Victoria's face was pale. "Can it be fixed?" "The code isn't the problem. The philosophy is," Zara replied. "You built this for them, not with them. You don't have time for a full redesign. But you can change the core interaction. You can make it respectful." For the next 48 hours, Zara didn't leave the Sterling Technologies building. Victoria, in a move that would have given her HR department a collective aneurysm, hired her as a temporary hospitality consultant, a paper-thin disguise that allowed her to be in the building. Zara worked alongside the engineers, not as a coder, but as a translator, not of language, but of experience. She brought Marcus in on a video call, and he, with his engineer's mind and a lifetime of lived experience, deconstructed the app's failures with brutal, elegant clarity. "You're trying to make us communicate like hearing people," he signed, with Zara interpreting. "Let us communicate like ourselves." Guided by Zara and Marcus, the team worked feverishly. They stripped away the patronizing features. They tweaked the algorithm to recognize the faster, more fluid pace of conversational ASL. They changed labels, redesigned icons, and altered the user flow to reflect the values of deaf culture community: directness, and visual storytelling. The app launched on schedule. The initial reviews were hesitant. Then, a prominent deaf blogger posted a video. "I don't know what they did at the last minute." She signed. But Connect, suddenly, gets it. It feels like it was made by one of us. The endorsement went viral. Downloads surged. Within a week, Connect was being hailed as a new standard for inclusive design. Victoria found Zara 2 days later, polishing silver in the back of another high-end restaurant. She slid an envelope across the prep table. It contained a check for $10,000. "That's a bonus for the catering staff," Victoria said, her voice low. "For their excellent service. And this," she added, placing a crisp business card beside it, "is for you. Call me. We need to create a more permanent arrangement." But their success had not gone unnoticed. Richard Blackwood, whose event management company handled staffing for half the luxury venues in the city, heard the whispers. A server from the Met Gala, consulting for a tech CEO. It was an affront to the natural order he so carefully curated. His hatred, rooted in a past Zara couldn't remember, found its focus. A week later, Zara's catering manager called her into his office. "I'm sorry, Zara," he said, avoiding her eyes. "There's been a complaint. A major client, Richard Blackwood. He said there were integrity issues. He's threatening to pull his contracts if you remain on our roster. My hands are tied." She was fired. The next day, she called another agency. They weren't hiring. A third said her application was lost. The message was clear. Blackwood wasn't just angry. He was trying to erase her, to lock her out of the only world she knew, to ensure she stayed in the shadows he believed were her rightful place. The taste of success was immediately followed by the bitter reality of his vendetta. She had a choice: retreat into the invisibility he was forcing upon her, or use the one sliver of light from Victoria Sterling to fight back. The blacklisting was systematic and cruel. One by one, the doors to the service industry, her only source of income for a decade, slammed shut. Blackwood's influence was a suffocating net. Zara was adrift. The $10,000 check from Victoria, a rapidly dwindling buffer against a tide of bills. Fear, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of her resolve. She met Victoria in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop in Midtown, a neutral ground between their two worlds. "He's not just trying to punish me," Zara said, her voice tight with a control that belied the panic churning inside her. "He's trying to bury me." Why the incident at the gala was trivial. This level of animosity feels personal. Victoria sipped her espresso, her gaze sharp. Power isn't about reason. Zara, it's about control. You disrupted his world. You crossed a line he believes should be impenetrable. People like Blackwood don't just dismiss threats. They annihilate them. She leaned forward. "The permanent arrangement I mentioned. It's time to define it. I'm creating a new position at Sterling, Director of Accessibility and Inclusive Design. I want you to run it." Zara stared at her. "Victoria, I don't have a degree. My resume says catering staff. Your board will laugh you out of the room." "My board answers to our shareholders," Victoria countered coolly. "And since Connect launched, our stock is up 18%. Our user engagement in the disability sector, a market we'd never successfully cracked, has skyrocketed. I'm not selling them a resume. I'm showing them results. The profits you generated for us speak louder than any MBA." It was a staggering gamble. For both of them. For Zara, it meant stepping out of the shadows completely, into a world she had only observed. For Victoria, it meant staking her reputation on an unproven, unconventional hire. "My first condition," Zara said, Her voice steady. Is that I hire my own lead engineer? My brother, Marcus. Victoria didn't hesitate. Done. Zara's ascent within Sterling Technologies was methodical and quiet. She wasn't a conventional executive. She didn't occupy a corner office. Instead, she chose a small, glass-walled room in the center of the main workspace. A symbolic choice. She was there to be seen. To be accessible. Her team was a collection of misfits. Much like herself. Marcus, finally given the tools and the trust to match his intellect, flourished. He brought in a blind coder who navigated complex systems with screen-reading software faster than most sighted developers, and a designer with dyslexia who had a genius for creating clean, intuitive, and uncluttered user interfaces. Zara's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. We don't guess. We ask. She told her team. They spent more time in community centers, schools for the deaf, and assisted living facilities than they did in the office. Her notebook, once a private collection of observations, became their project Bible. They didn't build products. They built solutions to problems people were actually having. Meanwhile, the question of Blackwood's obsessive hatred gnawed at her. This wasn't just professional jealousy. It was too venomous, too personal. She began to dig, using the company's resources. She ran a background check on Richard Blackwood. It was a long shot, but the memory fragment from the gala, the name, the smell of rain, the sound of weeping felt like a key to a lock she didn't know existed. The initial results were unremarkable. Privileged upbringing, private schools, a steady climb in the world of luxury event planning. But there was one detail that made her freeze. His hometown. A small, forgotten industrial city in upstate New York. The same city her family had fled after her father's death. She hired a private investigator, a discreet older man recommended by Sterling's legal team. I'm looking for a business failure, she told him. About 16 years ago, involving a company run by the Blackwood family, and I need to know if my father, Daniel Williams, a linguistic consultant, was involved. While the investigator worked, Zara focused on her mission at Sterling. Her team's first major project was to overhaul the internal communication software for a massive logistics conglomerate. A client Sterling had been trying to land for years. The company's global workforce included thousands of employees who were non-native English speakers, creating massive inefficiencies and misunderstandings. The conglomerate's executives presented the problem in a boardroom that felt like a high-tech tomb. We've tried translation software, the CEO said dismissively. It doesn't work. Nuance is lost. Errors are made. It's costing us millions. Zara listened. She didn't talk about code or algorithms. She talked about her father. My father was a linguist, she began, her voice resonating in the quiet room. He taught me that direct translation is a fool's errand. You can translate a word, but you can't translate trust. You can't translate cultural context. She and her team embedded themselves in the company's warehouses and call centers. They discovered the issue wasn't just language, it was culture. In some cultures, it was considered disrespectful to say no directly to a superior, leading to passive agreement and subsequent errors. In others, the use of certain idioms was causing catastrophic misinterpretations. Her team's solution wasn't just a better translation app. It was a new communication platform. It included a context engine that flagged culturally sensitive phrases, offered alternative wording, and provided brief explanations of cultural communication styles. It was a system built on empathy. The pilot program was a staggering success. Errors dropped by 70%. Efficiency increased by 30%. The conglomerate signed a $50 million contract with Sterling Technologies. The victory cemented Zara's position. She was no longer Victoria's gamble. She was the company's indispensable asset. The day the contract was signed, the private investigator called. His voice was grim. "I found it," he said. "Blackwood Industries, a textile company. They went bankrupt 16 years ago after a disastrous deal with a Japanese firm. The deal fell apart due to a translation error during the final negotiations. A catastrophic one." Zara held her breath. "My father." Daniel Williams. The investigator confirmed. He was the interpreter of record, hired by Blackwood's father, Richard Blackwood Sr. The fallout was immense. The company collapsed. The family lost everything. They were socially and financially ruined. 2 months later, Richard Blackwood Sr. took his own life. The room went cold. The fragmented memories snapped into place with sickening clarity. The weeping behind the thin wall of their apartment, it was her mother. After hearing the news, the smell of rain, it was the day they'd packed their car and left town under a cloud of shame. Her father hadn't just died. He had been disgraced. And Richard Blackwood hadn't just lost his father. He'd lost his entire world. And he blamed hers. The fight was no longer about proving her worth. It was a direct confrontation with her own history. A history she now realized she had never truly understood. Her quest for empowerment had led her straight back to the tragedy that had shattered her family, and to the man whose life had been shattered alongside it. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. Zara sat in her office, the city lights twinkling below, but all she could see was the ghost of her father. Not the warm, passionate intellectual she remembered, but a man accused of a failure so profound it had led to ruin and death. Richard Blackwood was no longer just a cruel bully. He was a man forged in the same fire of loss that had shaped her own life, albeit on the opposing side. Her drive was no longer a simple quest for success. It was now inextricably linked to a story of revenge, justice, and the tarnished legacy of the man who had taught her the power of words. The $50 million contract elevated Zara to a new level of prominence. She was Sterling's golden goose, the architect of their most profitable new division. Victoria rewarded her with a formal title, Vice President, Global Strategy, and a seat on the Senior Executive Council. She had power, real power. For the first time in her life, she could have focused solely on her work, on building her empire, and leaving the past buried. But the knowledge of Blackwood's history was a hot coal in her gut. She had to understand. Her investigator had sent a file, a digital archive of old news clippings, court documents, and bankruptcy filings. Late one night, with Marcus sitting beside her for support, she opened it. The headlines were brutal. Local textile giant collapses after failed Japanese merger. Translation: blunder costs hundreds of jobs. Blackwood patriarch dead in apparent suicide. The articles painted her father as the villain, an arrogant interpreter whose mistranslation of a single contractual clause, turning exclusive rights for a probationary period into perpetual and exclusive rights, had made the deal untenable for the Japanese corporation, which pulled out, bankrupting Blackwood Industries. Anonymous sources quoted in the articles described her father as in over his head and a fraud. "I don't believe it," Marcus signed, his movements sharp with anger. Dad was meticulous. He was the best. "The best can still make mistakes," Zara murmured, scrolling through the documents. But it felt wrong. It was too simple, too clean a narrative. Her new position gave her access to resources she'd never dreamed of. She used Sterling's corporate intelligence subscriptions, databases that could unearth long-forgotten digital footprints. She searched for any correspondence between her father and Blackwood Industries. Most of it was gone, lost to dead servers and outdated systems. But she found one thing, a single, recovered email fragment from her father's account. sent to a personal friend a week before the fateful negotiation. The text was corrupted, but a few phrases were clear, under immense pressure. Blackwood Sr. is insisting on a specific phrasing, feels ethically compromised, but the family's entire future is on the line. A cold dread washed over her. Her father hadn't simply made a mistake. He had been pressured. He had made a choice. The story was more complicated, and her father's role in it murkier than she wanted to admit. Just as she was grappling with this, Blackwood made his move. He had watched her rise with a seething, impotent rage. Now, he saw his chance to use her past against her. He couldn't get her fired from a job where she was the star, but he could destroy her credibility. He began a subtle but vicious smear campaign, leveraging his extensive network in the media and corporate worlds. He didn't attack her competence directly. That would be too easy to refute. Instead, he attacked her story. An anonymous op-ed appeared in a prominent business journal, titled "The Myth of the Untrained Genius." It didn't name Zara, but it didn't have to. It spoke of a dangerous trend in the tech world of elevating unqualified individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds based on sentiment rather than credentials. It warned that while their stories were inspiring, they lacked the rigorous ethical and academic training to handle high-stakes corporate responsibility. Then, the whispers started. Blackwood fed information to journalists and industry bloggers. He painted Zara as an opportunist, a fraud from a family of frauds. He leaked the story of her father's role in his family's ruin, twisting it to fit his narrative. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. One blog post read, "Like father, like daughter, they use language to deceive, to get what they want, regardless of the consequences." The attacks were insidious. They preyed on the very insecurities Zara had fought so hard to overcome. Her lack of a college degree, her background, her unconventional path, he weaponized it all. The narrative he was building was powerful. She wasn't a prodigy. She was a fluke, a diversity hire whose luck was about to run out, just like her disgraced father's. The campaign began to take its toll. A potential partner in Europe cited concerns about leadership stability before backing out of a deal. An invitation for Zara to speak at a major tech conference was quietly rescinded. Members of Victoria's board began to get nervous. "They're not questioning her results," Victoria told Zara during a tense meeting. "They're questioning the foundation. They're scared of the optics. The story Blackwood is selling is that you're a house of cards, and they're afraid of being there when it falls." The second obstacle was far more formidable than the first. Blackwood wasn't just trying to get her fired anymore. He was trying to dismantle her very identity, to poison her success by linking it to the shame and failure that had haunted her family for 16 years. He was putting her, and the entire reputation of Sterling Technologies, on trial in the court of public opinion, and in a world that valued pedigree over performance. He was dangerously close to winning. The invitation was both a pinnacle and a precipice. The World Economic Forum, the annual summit in Davos, Switzerland, where global leaders, CEOs, and thinkers convened to shape the future. Sterling Technologies had been asked to present on the future of inclusive economies, and Victoria had insisted on one speaker, Zara. It was the ultimate platform, a chance to solidify her authority on a global stage. It was also the perfect arena for a public execution. Zara knew Blackwood would not miss such an opportunity. The smear campaign had been his opening salvo. Davos would be his endgame. In the weeks leading up to the summit, the pressure was immense. The attacks had made Zara a polarizing figure. She was either a visionary hero or an unqualified imposter. The keynote was no longer just a presentation. It was her rebuttal, her trial, and her testimony, all at once. She and Marcus worked relentlessly, not on a defense, but on an undeniable demonstration of value. Her presentation would be a masterclass in her philosophy, a live, interactive showcase of how inclusive design could solve some of the world's most intractable problems. She arrived in the surreal alpine bubble of Davos to find the air thick with tension. She saw the whispers, the sideways glances from the titans of industry. Blackwood, she discovered, was there, in a grotesque twist of fate. His event management company, renowned for its flawless execution of high-stakes gatherings, was a primary contractor for the forum. He had failed upwards, his connections insulating him from true consequence. He was in charge of logistics for the main Congress Hall. He controlled the microphones, the lighting, the screens. He controlled her stage. The morning of her keynote, she saw him backstage. He met her gaze with a look of pure, triumphant malice. "Break a leg," he said, the old theatrical pleasantry dripping with venom. "I've made sure everything is perfect for you." The hall was packed. Every major news outlet was broadcasting live. Zara walked onto the stage, a lone figure in a simple, dark dress, her worn notebook clutched in her hand. She took her place at the sleek, minimalist lectern and looked out at the sea of powerful faces. "They say that the future is built by the people in this room," she began, her voice calm and clear. "But what if the architects of our best future are not in this room at all? What if they are in our factories, our service industries, our overlooked communities?" As she spoke, the large screen behind her was meant to display the title of her talk, "The Architecture of Opportunity." Instead, it flickered, and a different slide appeared. It was a scanned image of an old newspaper headline, "Linguists Blunder Destroys Blackwood Industries." A collective gasp swept through the hall. It was a direct, brutal assault, designed to shatter her composure and frame her entire speech through the lens of her family's alleged disgrace. Zara froze for a single, heart-stopping second. She saw Blackwood in the wings, a faint, cruel smile on his face. This was his checkmate. But, in that moment of crisis, 20 years of being her brother's voice in a hostile world took over. She had faced down doctors, employers, and bureaucrats. A saboteur in a tuxedo was just another barrier. She didn't panic. She pivoted. She turned to look at the headline, as if seeing it for the first time. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "This headline. Let's talk about it. It's a story about a communications failure. It's a story about how the wrong words, in the wrong context, can lead to ruin. It's the story of my father." The audience was rapt. This was no longer a keynote. It was a high-wire act of breathtaking courage. "That story is why I am here today," she continued, "because I have spent my life understanding the anatomy of a misunderstanding. And what my work has taught me is that the most dangerous misunderstandings are not between languages, but between experiences." Her microphone suddenly cut out. Dead silence. Blackwood's sabotage was relentless. He stood in the tech booth now, directing the chaos, without missing a beat. Zara unclipped the useless lavalier mic and let it drop to the floor. She took a step forward, to the very edge of the stage, forcing the audience to lean in. And then, she began to sign. Her ASL interpreter, a woman named Elise, was supposed to be in the front row, but her seat was empty. Another of Blackwood's chess moves. But Marcus was in the audience. He stood up, and, from the middle of the hall, began to interpret Zara's powerful, silent speech for the hearing world, his voice booming with emotion. The sight of a brother and sister, communicating seamlessly across a chasm of silence on the world's most important stage, was more powerful than any slide deck could ever be. Zara signed about empathy, about design, about seeing the world through another's eyes. And, as she did, she directed the audience to a URL she had prepared. A backup. Please, take out your phones. Marcus voiced for her. Go to this address. I had a feeling the technology here might fail me. On their phones, the audience saw her real presentation load. Interactive models, data visualizations, and something else. It was the complete, unredacted file on the Blackwood Industries collapse. It contained the news clippings, but it also contained something Zara had only uncovered the night before. Something her investigator had found on a deep dive into old corporate server backups. It was the final contract draft between Blackwood Industries and the Japanese firm. And next to the catastrophically mistranslated clause, there was a handwritten note in the margin from Richard Blackwood Sr. himself. The note read, DW. Advises against this phrasing. High risk of misinterpretation. I am overriding. We need the aggressive posture to close the deal. It was all there. Her father had been a scapegoat. He had warned his client. In writing, he had been ethically compromised. Yes, but not in the way she'd feared. He hadn't been a fraud. He'd been a subordinate, overruled by a desperate, arrogant man who then allowed him to take the fall to save his own reputation, right before the guilt and failure consumed him. Zara's final signed words, voiced by a tearful Marcus, hung in the silent hall. My father was not blameless. His mistake was allowing his expertise to be silenced by a man who valued power over wisdom. He paid for that mistake with his reputation, and Richard Blackwood's father paid for his with his life. This is the cost of not listening. This is the price of exclusion. She revealed the whole, complicated truth, a truth that didn't grant her pure, clean revenge, but offered a more profound, difficult justice. It was a story not of a simple villain and a hero, but of flawed, tragic human beings caught in a catastrophe of their own making. She held her final pose, hands frozen in the sign for truth. The silence in the hall was absolute. She had taken Blackwood's ultimate attack and turned it into the most powerful demonstration of her core message. She had not only survived his ambush, she had used it to redefine her own story, and his, in front of the entire world. The aftermath was a tidal wave. As the last sign faded from Zara's hands, the silence in the Congress Hall held for a beat, and then shattered. It wasn't applause. Not at first. It was a roar of shock, of admiration, of a paradigm being publicly and irrevocably shifted. The world's most powerful people had just witnessed a masterclass, not in technology or finance, but in grace under fire, in turning a weapon of shame into a tool of illumination. Blackwood was finished. Forum security, alerted by Victoria Sterling the moment the sabotage began, escorted a pale, trembling man from the tech booth. His professional ruin was absolute and immediate. But the real story wasn't his fall. It was Zara's ascendance. Delegates and CEOs swarmed the stage, not with sympathy, but with offers. They didn't see a victim. They saw a leader of unimaginable resilience. The head of a German automotive giant wanted her to consult on their autonomous vehicle interfaces for elderly drivers. A Japanese banking consortium asked for a meeting to overhaul their global communication protocols. The UN Secretary-General himself requested her help in chairing a new global commission on digital ethics. Her revelation of the complex truth, her father's complicity, and Blackwood Sr.'s fatal arrogance had done something unexpected. It had humanized her. In a world of polished corporate narratives, her raw, painful honesty was a lightning bolt. It earned her not just respect for her skill, but deep admiration for her integrity. She hadn't taken the easy path of pure revenge. She had chosen the harder, more honorable path of complete truth. In the quiet of their hotel suite that evening, the adrenaline finally subsided, leaving an aching exhaustion in its wake. Zara and Marcus sat on the balcony. The snow-covered Alps, a silent, majestic witness. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "So, Dad, he wasn't a failure." Marcus finally signed, his movements slow, contemplative. "He was just a man." "He was a brilliant man who made a compromised choice under impossible pressure," Zara said softly, voicing her thoughts as much for herself as for him. "He let his voice be silenced, and he spent the rest of his short life living with that." She looked at her brother, her eyes filled with a sad, profound understanding. "All this time, I've been fighting to have a voice. I think maybe I was also fighting for his." They talked for hours, processing the 16-year-old wound that had finally been lanced. They mourned the father they had lost. But for the first time, they saw him whole: his genius, his passion, and his tragic, human flaw. It was a quiet, painful, and necessary catharsis. The ghosts of the past were not banished, but they were finally at peace. The next days were a blur of meetings and new partnerships. Victoria Sterling fielded the deluge of offers, her face a constant mixture of pride and awe. Sterling Technologies was no longer just a successful tech firm. It was the global epicenter of a new movement, a new way of thinking about talent, innovation, and the very nature of expertise. Zara was its reluctant, but undeniable, figurehead. She had survived the fire and emerged not scorched, but forged. Her power was no longer just positional. It was moral, earned in the crucible of public trial. And it was now absolute. 6 months later, Zara walked through the soaring, empty space of the Grand Ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The chandeliers were dark, the marble floors silent, the air still carrying the phantom scent of 1,000 opulent evenings. But today, there was no gala, no temporary staff, no suffocating silence of the elite. There were only Zara, Victoria, Marcus, and a team of architects. Using the immense personal capital she had accrued and the backing of a consortium of investors who believed in her vision, Zara had done something no one had expected. Through a series of discreet, complex financial maneuvers, a new holding company established by her had acquired the parent corporation that owned not only the museum's exclusive event management contract, but the building's catering and services divisions as well. She had not just beaten her enemy, she had bought his entire kingdom. She stood on the exact spot where Richard Blackwood had humiliated her. The memory was no longer a sting, but a distant echo, a marker of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. "We'll tear out the dais," she said to the lead architect, her voice resonating in the cavernous space. "Open up the center. This won't be a room for presentations. It will be a space for collaboration. Glass walls, modular workstations, a central forum for open debate." Victoria smiled, shaking her head in wonder. "You know, when most people get this kind of power, they buy a yacht." "I'm not interested in escaping," Zara replied. "I'm interested in transforming." This ballroom, the very stage of her deepest humiliation, was being reborn. It would become the global headquarters for her new, independent foundation, the Williams Institute for Applied Expertise. Its mission was simple and revolutionary to find, fund, and amplify overlooked talent in every corner of society. It would partner with corporations and governments to build pipelines for non-traditional experts, the mechanics with genius-level insights into logistics. The home health aides who understood the needs of the elderly better than any geriatrician. The community organizers who were masters of scalable social architecture. In the final scene of this transformation, Zara stood in her new office, which overlooked the newly renovated ballroom, now teeming with light and energy. The space was alive with a vibrant, diverse collection of people who, just a year ago, had been invisible. Her desk was a clean, modern slab of reclaimed wood. On it sat two items: her original, worn-out spiral notebook, and a single, sealed envelope. Marcus came in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked down at the bustling scene below. "It's loud in here," he signed, a wide grin on his face. "Visually loud. I love it." "This is what it should have always been," Zara signed back. Later that day, alone, she opened the envelope. It was a confirmation from a financial services firm. She had established a significant 8-figure endowment, funded anonymously. The endowment was for a charitable fund dedicated to providing financial and mental health support for families affected by corporate ethical failures. Its primary beneficiary was a national suicide prevention organization that focused on high-stress professional communities. It was a quiet, unseen act of grace, an acknowledgement of the shared tragedy that had, in its own terrible way, started everything. It was not forgiveness for Richard Blackwood, but it was an empathy for his father's suffering. It was a final, silent word in a long and painful conversation, a way to honor her own father's complicated legacy by helping to prevent others from sharing his fate. The sun set over Central Park, casting long shadows across the city. Zara looked out her window, not at the skyline, but down at the transformed space below, a place of power, once used to exclude, now reborn as a global beacon of inclusion. Her journey hadn't been about revenge. It had been about reclamation, reclaiming her story, her father's legacy, and the very definition of what it meant to be seen.